Okay, it's 2 o'clock on the dot, so we can go ahead and get started. Welcome to everyone who's joining. Welcome to Mental Health Mondays with the James Beard Foundation and Not 9 to 5. For the past 6 months, we have partnered up one Monday a month to lead a mental health check-in geared towards those in the hospitality industry. Thank you so much for joining this month for our last one of the year. Just a note, you are invited to ask questions during the session. Please do so by raising your hand, but just know that we may not get to these questions until the last 15 minutes or so of the meeting. I will now pass it off to Hassel Aviles, Executive Director of Not 9 to 5, who is also joined by Sheik, Chef, Founder, and Executive Director of Restaurant After Hours, to lead this conversation. Thank you both.
Thank you so much for having us. Welcome, everyone. And yes, as Megan said, this is a Mental Health Mondays check-in. And every event that I've done like this, I have invited a guest. So today we have a special guest, Zia Sheik, and I'm going to just quickly introduce myself, and then Zia, I'm going to ask if you can introduce yourself. So my name is Hassel Aviles. I am coming to you from Toronto, in Canada. And although I live in another country than some of you, I've worked in the restaurant and hospitality community for years, and I've found that we're all more similar than different. And being in the same community, leaves us with having very, relatable experiences. I grew up in the restaurant industry. I've worked every front of house, service position you can think of, all the way up until owning a restaurant. And throughout the entire time, over 2 decades of being in this industry, I also lived with mental illness. And that led me to, start Not 9 to 5 a couple years ago. And Not 9 to 5 is a global leader in mental health advocacy, and we focus on the food service and hospitality sector. We do that with practical education and community building events like this. So that's me and Not 9 to 5. And Z, I'm going to ask if you can introduce yourself and your organization as well.
Sure, absolutely, and thank you so much for having me today. Yeah, so our stories are actually pretty similar, except instead of the front of the house, I've worked in almost every aspect of the back of the house. So I've been a professional chef. So I'm coming from Brooklyn, New York, USA. I've been a professional chef for 18 years now. And 3 years ago, I started an organization called Restaurant After Hours. So in 2018, so I live with depression and anxiety. In 2018, I found things to be very overwhelming for me to the point where I was actually fired from a chef position. And I realized that it was finally time to take some time off from the industry and focus on myself. So I started an organization that provides access to mental health counseling, as well as connections to crisis resources. And also, we started advocating for just what mental health is in this industry. So the organization has been growing gradually, and now we're at a point where we are offering virtual support groups for our industry, and it's a way for hospitality workers to come in and connect with one another and share stories and find support in one another.
Thank you so much. I love what you do, and I think it's so amazing to hear how many different organizations and people in hospitality these days are doing similar work, but yet all of us seem to have our own take on it.
Hmm.
It's like not we do similar but different things, and I just love supporting other folks, that are in this space because, as you know, this is still such a new conversation for this industry.
Yes.
Um, so, I think that's actually a really good spot to start on. In terms of our industry currently, there's so much impact from the pandemic, obviously.
Hmm.
We've been definitely one of the hardest hit industries, and that's no matter where in the world you live. The pandemic has really brought to everyone's attention, it feels like, what, you know, what the vulnerable points are and what the vulnerabilities that already existed pre-pandemic, obviously.
Hmm.
I always like to kind of highlight that there was a mental health epidemic before the pandemic. The rates of mental health crisis and substance use were exponentially higher than many other industries. And I feel like the pandemic just has kind of turned up the heat a bit. Like
Yes, definitely.
there was already a hot pot of water, simmering, and now kind of gone to a boil. So I like to highlight that because for me, that's really helped validate a lot of what I've been experiencing and feeling in the
Hmm.
last 2 years. It really kind of normalizes it for me that, oh, right, like everything that we're all feeling and experiencing is also just a natural reaction to, these events, on top of what already pre existed, obviously.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you. Like up until the pandemic, this like these issues, as much they were very present, but they were affecting small groups of people all across. But what the pandemic did was it affected millions of us overnight, to the point where all of us just had to take a step back and just realize, like, hey, these are issues that have always existed, that we've never tried to solve, that were affecting all of us, like, immediately, just because we realized that we just have no safety net with this industry. So for us in New York, it was March 16th, 2020, when everything shut down. And all of a sudden it was just like everybody was just like, okay, what do we do now? Like, because originally we were just planning on keeping things shut down for 2 weeks. And as much as I was thinking, all right, it's gonna be a lot longer than that, even just for those 2 weeks, everyone was just like, okay, well, how am I supposed to, take care of myself over these next 2 weeks? Do I take a break? Do I look for other ways to make money? Like, what do I do? It just brought on so much anxiety. And then as time just continued, people, like, the mental health of all these workers were really being affected. And it really made us just take a pause and just say, all right, you know what, we need to really start paying attention to these things, and how do we cope with this?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it's still a very crucial time, to be honest. It's not over yet.
No, definitely,
Obviously,
definitely
we're in it. Yeah, right. Like, obviously, we're in a very different stage. And this isn't new like it was in March of 2020, but I find every day, every week, every month, and now moving into another year, there's still new developments
not. Hmm.
all the time. And living with that high level of uncertainty, there's no way that doesn't affect your mental health.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, all of us have mental health, whether you have mental illness or not, and it fluctuates. It's fluid, and I think that's something that we don't really learn about enough, really, as kids or as young people entering the industry. These conversations just aren't as prevalent, in culinary school, hospitality school, or even
Hmm.
in the workforce when you're first entering. And I think right now, that's starting to change and adapt. And so part of these conversations for me is also learning learning how to navigate these conversations, because they're not, for some folks, they're not easy conversations to have, right?
No. Hmm.
um I feel like, Zia, you and I probably have these conversations quite often, so we have a little bit more experience, but even so, I still constantly have to remind myself I'm not a mental health professional. Obviously, I have lived experience of mental illness, and I have lived experience with many other things, like trauma and grief and substance use. Um, but I realized that, even if you're not a mental health professional, you can still learn how to hold space, how to validate someone's experience, and how to support someone, through a difficult time or a crisis moment. And so for me, that's a huge part of checking in, you
Hmm.
know, and learning how to check in with yourself, obviously, but also learning how to check in with others, because that's something I definitely did not learn in all of my training in all of the restaurants and bars and hotels, cafes and such that I worked in, or events. These were skills that were definitely not taught or even forget taught, they weren't even encouraged um, in the workplace. So now being able to do this work and normalize this more, I always like to share this kind of information wherever possible. And so, in terms of checking in on someone, I want us to do a mental health check in for ourselves
Sure.
as individuals. So, checking in on us as the people that we are, and then also later do a check in on our organization. So, what are you hearing in the community? What is Restaurant After Hours hearing, seeing, feeling as an organization? So, when starting with ourselves, um, I guess for me, if I'm doing an honest check in with myself right now, for this time of year, I'm doing okay. I feel like it starts to get a little bit more stressful next week as it gets closer to the end of the year. This week, I'm still wrapping up work stuff, and so um, I have enough busy distractions and stuff.
Hmm.
Versus the next 2 weeks, I'll have more time to myself, but I really struggle this time of year. It starts usually around late November, the change in the season, the weather, the lack of sunlight. I definitely have to like up my vitamin D, and it's just I can feel the like weight of the year. It's just I find it a really exhausting time of year. There's also so much stimulation and pressure to, quote unquote, like smile and be cheerful and get
Hmm.
into the, whether you celebrate the holidays or not. I just feel like it can't escape it. And I find that pressure to be quite intense. I also don't have a traditional family, so I feel like that is part of it too. And I also have I find that the holidays are kind of a trigger for grief. And so I also have a lot of grief this time of year for folks that I've lost. Um, so yeah, I'm doing okay. And I'm also really nervous about the next couple of weeks as we get more into the more intense holiday season. Um, but Zia, tell me, how are you doing these days?
Well, I am sorry for all the things that you are going through, and separately, if there's a way that I can support you through all this, just let me know. Um, yeah. So, from a
Thank
personal,
you.
you're welcome. From a personal standpoint, speaking very openly and honestly, uh, this last week has been extremely overwhelming for me, just on a personal level. So, I'm actually in a stage of grief right now as well, where the holiday season, as all hospitality workers know, this is our busiest time. So I'm trying to balance work and as well as some loss that I've endured over the last few weeks. My partner's mom is also in the ICU right now, so this is something that we're navigating currently. And yeah, it's overwhelming. It can be stressful, but the only thing that we can do is just take it a day at a time and try to navigate this together. I've also just passed 3 years of sobriety last week, so it's especially hard during these times where when things seem overwhelming, I will reach out to many people and just say, "Hey, you know what? I'm going through a stressful time right now. I'm afraid of a relapse. Do you mind just checking in on me like every now and then?" And it's good that I have that community around me of people that I can count on to do that. But on a personal level, that's what I'm dealing with away from the organization right now.
Oh, Zia, thank you so much for sharing that.
No.
And, same back. If there's anything that I can do to support you, and yeah, we can connect offline. But I really appreciate you sharing that. It's so important to, I think, be whenever comfortable, and if you feel safe to be honest. And I really appreciate you doing that. Yeah, it is a really, really fragile time.
Yeah.
So I've just a reminder too for anyone that's curious in terms of checking in on someone else. There's kind of some high level reminders I always like to use as a guideline that I'll just run through quickly. Five kind of steps to take when checking in on someone. So the first is, I think, to ask for consent to offer support. Obviously, I had Zia's consent to have this conversation today,
Yes.
but I think it's a good reminder to remind, sometimes when we think of the word consent, we think about it in other contexts. And I always like to remind folks that it's important to get consent when, wanting to have these kinds of conversations too, because sometimes someone just isn't prepared that day or in that moment to answer those questions. So once you have consent, just remind yourself that you're not fixing anything and you're not here to solve anyone else's problems. It's really, not the point of a check-in. The third reminder is to try to practice your active listening skills and to listen without judgment. The goal of active listening is always to listen to understand, not to respond. It's really, really easy to understand that concept, and it's quite difficult to practice, actually. We're so wired to listen to respond, um, so that's one to definitely put into practice before you jump into a conversation like this. I think also number four, holding space for folks with dignity and respect helps to validate what they're experiencing. I think sometimes folks may share things with you when you check in on them that you find hard to hear or you may not agree with or you have a hard time and just learning how to hold space for that and just validate what their experience is so important. And the last one is again with consent, offering information, resources, and other forms of support is really important. So those are kind of five tips for when checking in on someone that I always like to share. I wish I'd learned this stuff when I was younger, to be honest. It would
Mhm.
have saved me a lot of grief and distress. But yeah, for anyone joining, just a reminder: this is Mental Health Mondays with James Beard Foundation and Not 9 to 5. This is our last mental health check-in of the year, and I'm here joined by Zia Sheik from Restaurant After Hours. My name is Hassel Aviles, and we just covered 5 tips for learning how to do a mental health check-in. So Zia, I really appreciate you being so honest about how you're doing, and I'm curious if you can give us um, an update as well on like checking in on Restaurant After Hours. What are you feeling, seeing, hearing in your community?
Sure. So we do. Also, all of our programs are done virtually. So, like, we see people from not only all over New York, but all over the U.S., all over the world. And then I also follow a lot of restaurant groups online as well. And as much as like the biggest topic that's trending throughout everybody right now is the topic about wages in this industry. People are being a lot more open about what they're getting paid, like what they feel like they should be speaking about their worth right now. How almost every restaurant right there is working short staffed. How you can find a job anywhere. That seems to be like the biggest trend that's following through everything. But on a personal level from the organization, probably like 90% of the emails that actually come through, I was very surprised by this, are actually males that reach out looking for therapists. And the stigma is that men don't talk about their mental health, that they're afraid to open up and show that vulnerability. But it's such a it's such a proud thing whenever I see one of those emails come through, because I'm just like, okay, you know what, this is great. It's amazing to see this happening, and it's amazing to see this change. So and then of course there's everything in between as well. So yeah, just the trends that we're seeing right now is that like this is an overwhelming time for a lot of people, and but people are talking about their own mental health. They're looking for change, and um, yeah, it's an amazing thing to see, because I know that just speaking for myself, like working in this industry, working in the back of the house, working as a chef, there was a long time when I just kind of put all that to the side. I didn't talk about it for myself. I didn't. There was a period where I didn't allow others to talk about it to me, just because I was so, this industry kind of morphed me to be a certain way. And I remember just that time where like I hated myself every single day for not being able to not being able to listen to people, not giving people like the time of the day, just focusing more so on the job. But it's great to see that not only for myself, for the community around me, just taking this pause and just saying, hey, you know what, it's time that we put a focus on ourselves and took care of ourselves.
Absolutely. I love that, Zia. Thank you so much for saying that. And I think it's like that hospitality turning inwards, right?
Yeah.
I think it's that a whole concept of, taking care of others does mean taking care of yourself.
Yes.
Because you won't be able to provide the same. Um, if you're not okay, right? Or if
Yep.
you're
Definitely.
struggling or you're unstable or whatever the case may be. So I love that reminder so much. And I agree with you. We are so conditioned.
Yes.
If you've worked in this industry for more than 3 years, and especially if you worked in this industry when you were young, younger, I would say, like anywhere from your teens into your early 20s, those are such formative years. And so often, actually, our industry opens its doors as people's first jobs. So much of our industry is made up of a younger generation. And when you're in these work environments where certain behavior is normalized, um, that starts to shape you, and that starts
Mhm.
to shape the way you see the world and what you think workplaces are meant to be like or not be like. I remember that really messed me up in my 20s because I my first job was not in the hospitality industry, but then I did move into the hospitality industry, and going in and out of this industry and other industries is what made me realize kind of what the norms were,
Mhm.
because they were really different in other industries.
Very much so.
Um,
Very
right?
much
And
so.
so you
Yeah.
start to realize, like, oh, this isn't everywhere. This is just here that this is happening.
Yeah.
And that was actually kind of a saving grace for me, because I think had I only been in this industry, it would have taken me longer to realize, you know, what was helpful and not helpful, and what is, quote unquote, like, what are norms in other industries. Um, And I think also this idea of repressing and suppressing emotional experiences
Mhm.
is a huge one. Um, you touched on earlier, like males, these emails that you're getting from men. And I really appreciate that, you sharing that, because I do agree with you. For example, not 9 to 5, same with you. We have partnerships and connections all over the world, mostly US, Canada, UK, and throughout Europe. But I definitely have noticed, and even when I look at the analytics, most of our community online is made up of folks that identify as women. And
Mhm.
we have, I think, close to 70 or so percent. The the numbers always changing, these things always evolve
Of
over
course. Yeah.
time,
Always.
but right, but it's definitely, and it's 65, now it's 70, and then sometimes it goes back down. But I think a lot of that is what you're talking about in terms of like how our society, conditions children.
Mhm.
If you're a little boy and you're taught to, not show your emotions or be vulnerable, or if you're taught, this misconception that vulnerability is a weakness, um, then that can obviously really impact
Mhm.
how you're going to talk about your mental health, how you're going to share your, you know, authentic experiences, you know, if they don't coincide with these ideas that are being shoved down your throat.
Yeah.
I think in kitchens too, we have the influence of the brigade system.
Mhm.
And there's also a lot of, we still live in a society that is very patriarchal. The patriarchy is alive and strong. And, there's a lot of misogyny I found too in the hospitality industry.
Mhm.
In restaurants, a lot of our industry for the most part is led by males.
Yep.
And so that also plays into all of that as well. And it's nice to see it changing. It's definitely evolving, and that's very promising. but it's definitely, these things take time. It took us centuries to get here.
Yes, it did. It did.
So obviously, it's not just going to change overnight. But I think conversations like this one, and I think the work, that's being done, and even like you said, the mainstream media, like we're starting to have more open conversations about things like pay, or, other challenges in the workplace. I think this all contributes and helps for sure. Um, and I am hopeful, even though I may not sound hopeful sometimes just because of the reality of what I'm seeing and hearing. I actually am quite hopeful because even, I don't know about you, Zia, but even what I've seen in the last 3 years since I started Not 9 to 5, or I guess almost 4 years now, but since we started Not 9 to 5, I have seen such a massive change.
Yes.
And so, yeah, although things are definitely a struggle still, um, it is important, I think, to acknowledge the progress or the changes that have happened. Um, so yeah, in terms of the industry at large, so we covered kind of, what we're seeing and hearing. Similar to you, I definitely have heard a lot about the pay issue. But even more than that, I've also been hearing a lot about the staffing crisis and
Yep.
attracting and retaining talent.
Hmm.
How do you find staff? How do you keep staff and all of that? That's something that I think Not 9 to 5 has really, heard from a lot. Um, and oh, I see someone has raised their hand. So we were going to save this to the end, but I'm gonna just say let's bring them up. Um, because I'm curious if there's
Uh,
any comments or questions.
let's see. That should have worked. I
Hey y'all, it's Melinda here from Chow. And yeah, I'm not sure if you're hearing me. Yeah.
Yeah, we can
Yeah.
hear you.
Okay, great.
Hey,
I
Melinda.
didn't mean to actually raise my hand. That was a slip as I was putting my phone in my pocket. But I would love to talk about everything that you're sharing, especially if I could go back to what you talked about the 5 tips for giving space to folks. And Zia, even your comment. By the way, congratulations on 3 years.
Thank you.
About uh, men in the workplace and things like that. We had a gentleman in one of our trainings today, so insightful, uh, mentioned that we're already actually really good at checking in. We're trained in the hospitality, especially front of the house. You go to a table, when you describe consent, consent can look like not asking somebody a question when their mouth is full, right? Or in the back of the house, consent can look like not approaching someone when it's clear that their plate is already too full, right? So sometimes the consent isn't the literal expression of "May I ask you a question right now?" It's a pre-question about, does it look as though this person has the time to share vulnerably with me right now? And I thought that was so intuitive. He also mentioned about how some of the best musicians in the world, some of the greatest writers in the world are men. And so, we're minimizing the male experience when we look at the outward expression of verbal communication, being able to talk about feelings. Again, sharing that sometimes listening to a song together can be being vulnerable, or even the choice of music that somebody puts on in the kitchen can really be their outward expression of how they're feeling that day. And it doesn't have to be, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling depressed. Like sometimes the expressions are just nonverbal, and that men are actually very skilled at being vulnerable with nonverbal communication. Again, going back to music, art, writing, poetry. So incorporating the idea that people can bring their artwork to a workplace, setting up a gallery of coworkers' art in an employee break room or employee change room, or inviting folks making it okay to invite folks out to your open mic night, because that can actually be more intimate than sitting down belly up to a table and talking about feelings, just the myriad of expressions that different individuals and different bodies have for expressing feelings. But that's kind of taking the conversation backwards, and for that I apologize. I would say talking about making workplaces somewhere where somebody wants to be and wants to stay. Some of the things that they've been working with, the restaurants here in Colorado, far and above the restaurant experiences I had in Minnesota and Wisconsin and even California. They've got some great ideas here, bringing in what's worked in some larger organizations like the Ritz-Carlton. We've got a restaurant that we're in touch with pretty regularly. They've created a employee committee, almost like a peer review team that checks in with the staff generally, so that the obligation doesn't fall on the manager to always be asking, how is everyone today? Where's everyone at? What do you need? That kind of thing. They actually have it's a smaller organization. It's like 10 or 15 employees, but 20% of them, right? Three people are actually being asked and compensated for the extra time it takes to, in addition to do their own jobs, kind of check in with each other in a lateral way, that shoulder to shoulder support that works in like military settings, which of course we know the culinary industry is built on. Other things, the flex scheduling, the gig pro, right? It's funny, I moved out to Denver myself and I'm working part-time for Chow, and I was looking at the gig pro ads that were being posted by restaurants, and it's kind of a fake idea that you're going to go and work one day a week in a restaurant. All the restaurants that are out here are listed on the Gig Pro and Gig Smart and all that kind of apps. They're saying they want people like hired guns immediately, but they're not for one day shifts. They're basically putting Craigslist ads or Indeed ads on Gig Pro, because everyone's still kind of stuck and mired in this idea that in order to be a good employee, you need to work 20 to 40 hours a week and be loyal to that location. You can't have a second job. We have to be your first priority. So while Gig Smart, Gig Pro, all those kind of like drop-in hired gun apps are definitely serving other industries challenged by the same thing as food service industries are, it seems really slow for restaurants to break free of that. In order to be a good employee, we have to own your life. And I'm going to shut up now because I just said a lot. And I didn't even mean to raise my hand. So thanks for letting me share.
Thanks, Melinda. I appreciate that. Yeah, I think that, you reminded me so much of something that I also, I think it's really important to point out is that so much of the help that our industry needs in terms of improving workplace mental health and figuring out how to, foster psychological safety in the workplace and all these things that are really missing from the industry. I think one of the biggest things is learning from other industries. And so, like you said, like the gig economy is definitely similar to ours in some ways. But learning from other industries is a big part, I think, of how we move forward. We don't have to recreate the wheel. There's a lot of different incredible training, resources, tools, skills that we can learn how to develop based on so much of this kind of work that has already been done in other industries. And I think a lot of it is about, our industry looking beyond our own little bubble. We definitely are one of a kind in terms of certain things, but in other things, we're made up of humans. And wherever there's people, there are these topics that arise in the workplace. And so, like, one of the things I've found that has been incredibly helpful in working with all kinds of hospitality businesses, not just restaurants, has been really learning more about this idea of psychological safety and how, what psychological safety is and how do you manage to bring it into a workplace. It's not something that you ever, quote unquote, like fix or do. You're never really done it's an ever evolving, you know, approach, and it really requires the buy-in of the entire team, and it's something that you really need to foster to keep alive, and when I say psychological safety, if you're unclear, because I was for years, to be honest, it really just means that you're in an environment where you can make mistakes, be vulnerable with one another, take risks, give and receive feedback, without the without the fear of negative consequences to how you're perceived or your job itself. So that's what I mean by psychological safety in the workplace. And I think when I look back to all the places I worked in, not many at all offered psychological safety in the workplace. And this is a term that was coined, a couple decades ago, in a totally different industry, but it's now been widely adapted throughout the world, as something that's pretty crucial for high performing and productive teams. For really effective teams to take place, to increase creativity, innovation, trust, all of these things, it really does require psychological safety. And in our industry, I think one of the things that's missing a lot is leadership training, around concepts like this one. Zia, do you have anything to share on that?
Yeah, so I will say, like, I mean, there was a lot there, but I will say that so in 2019, a couple months after I started Restaurant After Hours, I joined the gig economy. So I started working for four different tech platforms here in New York, as a way to get into different kitchens and see how they were set up. Look at their leadership, look at their staffs, look at just look at like the mental health in the workplaces. And I had a very positive experience in the fact that I would go in there, no one knew who I was, but as I spoke up and said, all right, working side by side, like next to other cooks, next to other hospitality professionals, I would say, you know what, I have an organization for mental health, and I'm here, I'm a sober chef, and I'm here working with you. And that's all it took, really, for people, complete strangers, just to open up. There were so many people that I met that were holding so much inside that were just kind of like, hey, you know what? This is somebody that I can talk to. This is somebody that kind of, quote unquote, gets it. And their walls just broke down, and it's like the floodgates just opened about everything that they're holding in terms of like their workplace, in terms of like their life. And so, just in terms of like psychological safety, like it only sometimes it only takes just that one person just to find the strength to speak up and just say, hey, you know what? This is real. These are real problems that we go through, and I'm okay to talk about it. Where it then becomes normalized within the entire room to do so. So like that's one thing. That was probably the most positive thing that I experienced working for like for these gig platforms. But overall, I didn't really like them. But that was probably the most positive thing.
Oh, I so appreciate you sharing that, Zia. I think
Yeah.
you brought up a good point too, though, that like it doesn't take much sometimes,
Yeah.
you know, and I think that's part of why once I kind of realized the influence of the brigade system in our industry, that's also when I started realizing that like it has to start with leadership,
Yep.
because they have the most amount of influence. And although it can only take one person to make change, I completely agree with that. Um, you can have a lot of impact when that's coming from the top, and when it's normalized, and there's role modeling happening across the board, not just from one person. But I love what you're saying though about how it can really just be one person in some cases, because it kind of is very encouraging to think that like any little step makes a difference.
Hmm.
Anything can make an impact, and it's so true as well what you said, like so many of us are holding so much in,
Yep.
especially if you from a older generation of the industry,
Hmm.
because I do find that it is quite different with the younger end of the younger generations coming in. I do find it is quite different. They definitely don't have the same um, experiences or thoughts, or stigma in the same way. Like obviously, it still exists in some form or another. Stigma looks different for everyone, but
Hmm.
um, Yeah, it's definitely starting to shift, I find. So as we come to the last like 20 minutes, if anyone else has anything else they want to share or say, please feel free to put up your hand. I'll happily bring you up. Um, but the other thing I wanted to just touch on as well is just, oh, there is someone. I'm going to invite Mimi up. Megan, do you know how to do this?
Yep, I
Sorry.
just did it. Sorry, it took.
Thank you. Hi, Mimi, Chef Mimi. You're
Hi
just
there.
on mute.
Hi, how's it going?
Did you want to share anything, Mimi? I
Oh,
saw you put your hands up.
I didn't know if it was my turn to speak. I just wanted to commend you for this room. I try to come whenever I could, and just want to let you know that as you're closing your mental health series for this year. We're about to launch a new series of rooms under our club Food is Religion called Mental Health for Professionals. May I speak a little bit about it?
Sure,
If that's okay with you.
sure.
Um, when we were planning this room, which was supposed to be for the hospitality industry, but as we dive deep into the issues, that we wanted to talk about in each room, we realized a lot of these issues apply to other industries as well. And so the title of the room is called Mental Health for Professionals. And we're hoping to bring more people to joining the conversation. Our room will debut next Wednesday, the 22nd. And the first topic will be about burnout. But other, fascinating topics will be discussed and need to be brought to the surface. And we have four people in the panel, a psychotherapist, a mental health coach, and two chefs. One of them is a survivor of gender discrimination, which she can share about her experience. And the other one is a chef that specializes in healthy eating. And we want to take a holistic approach to mental health by also suggesting foods to lift your moods. That has a lot to do with healthy eating and so forth. And so I hope that to have your support, and would love to invite you to be our host moderators if you're interested. But that's all I have to share. Thank you so
Oh,
much.
thank you so much, Chef Mimi. That's so kind. I really appreciate the invite. I will definitely follow up with you offline. But thank you for sharing that because I think it's so important for folks to learn about other resources and rooms, and spaces like that have these conversations. So thank you for sharing that. I really, really appreciate it. Um, we have a few 15 minutes left. Anyone that's just joining, this is our final Mental Health Mondays check-in that we do monthly with James Beard Foundation and Not 9 to 5. My name is Hassel Aviles. I'm the co-founder and executive director of Not 9 to 5, and I'm joined today by Zia Sheik of Restaurant After Hours in New York City. So yeah, there's minutes left, and I just kind of wanted to focus on um, what else is going on, in the industry, what else that we're experiencing and feeling and hearing about in our community. Zia, you and I obviously come at this from such different places in terms of front of house or back of house or, so many other differences that we have. But I think,
Mhm.
what we really do have in common is our focus on providing support, for the industry that doesn't currently exist.
Yes, definitely.
And so I'm going to share a little bit about something Not 9 to 5 has been working on this year that's launching next year. And then I would love if you could also share, Zia, with the room, more specifics and logistics around the resources that you offer with
Sure.
Restaurant After Hours and what the groups look like, where folks can find you, etc. So with Not 9 to 5, I wanted, one thing that I think is really important is really practical education and language around mental health and substance use challenges. I think that oftentimes there's so many misconceptions, and a lot of us don't have the mental health education that others do. This industry has neglected this topic for so long. And we're catching up, as we said earlier, we're catching up on centuries of things being done one way. And it's so refreshing to see things moving in a different direction and, different things happening. But one thing that I've found is there's not a lot of workplace training, like workplace mental health training that exists. And so Not 9 to 5 this year took the time to develop a certification program. So we created a certification program to give folks a really basic mental health education and then also train on developing your support skills. And what that looks like is learning, some of the things that we've talked about today, a lot of topics we've covered today, like psychological safety or holding space, doing check ins and such. But there's so much more as well. And I've found that this industry, it's so common to experience workplace trauma. And part of that is because high paced, nature of the industry. Some of that is the precarious hours we work. Some of that is just dealing with humans day to day. And some of that is also easy access to substances. And when you mix it all together, amongst many other aspects that I haven't mentioned, it's not an if you will find yourself having to manage a mental health crisis or have something happen around you. It's more of a when. And so because it's an inevitable aspect of the industry, we developed this program to help folks like better understand how to manage those situations for themselves and for others. So that's coming out in January. Not9to5.org is our website, with the 9 and the 5 being numbers. We have a new website launching very soon, and you will hear us be promoting lots of stuff in January. But yeah, just wanted to give a plug for some of the work we've been working on this year, some of the things coming up. I think how giving people language and skills and tools for how to manage workplace mental health and how to improve, um, the emotional experiences that folks have at work is so important. So that's a little bit about Not 9 to 5 and the work we've been doing. Zia, can you tell us a little bit about what Restaurant After Hours is up to and what you offer?
Sure, absolutely, and I want to say congratulations on everything that you guys have been working on this past year. I think it's incredibly important, and it's going to be very useful for so many workplaces.
Yes,
And
thank you. I will
yeah,
be in
you're very
touch in
welcome.
January, sharing and plugging away all the things, but I wanted to drop that seed. So thank you, Zia.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, I think it's incredibly important. So, yeah, thank you for everything that you guys have been doing as well. Yeah, so this year we've our biggest focus this year was bringing back our support group program. So in July, we hired a licensed mental health counselor by the name of Julie D'Amico, who's now overseeing the program. We've brought on three new facilitators, Kiri, Linda, and Taylor, who are now doing three virtual support groups for us a week. The intention behind these support groups is it's a peer to peer space where hospitality professionals can log in, share their experiences, support one another, and then we also provide mental health coping skills and mental health tools to help attendees in their personal lives. So each week, Sundays, Mondays, and Tuesdays, we focus around a certain type of psychoeducation. Today, we're actually going to have our conversation surrounding substance abuse, and the intention is for the facilitators at the very end to provide coping skills and also mental health tools to help attendees around that subject. So it's Sunday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, Mondays at 5 p.m. Eastern, and Tuesdays at 11 a.m. Eastern are the times that we're offering right now. So that has been our main focus, to bring back our virtual support group program this year. They launched again in early November, and now it's going to be full on year round, that we're hoping to continue this. So Yeah, so like we're hoping by next year we can bring on maybe one or two more facilitators, offer more meetings, but that has been our main focus. Restaurant after hours at its core has always been what we started off as a way to, for if people reach out, we help refer them to other resources that they may or may not need. So if people feel comfortable, they can tell us about their issues that they're going through. We will connect them to therapists. We will connect them to crisis hotlines. We will connect them to other free resources out there. There's a few other nonprofits here in New York that provide free counseling. We can guide people that way. We do mental health presentations inside restaurants. We advocate for a free national program called Mental Health First Aid, which follows the concept of ALGE, which is ALGEE, which is assess assess situations, listen non-judgmentally, give reassurance, encourage self-help, and encourage support through other resources. So, yeah, I mean, like we're pretty busy as an organization. We offer a lot of things, but our main focus this year has been bringing back our support group program.
Congratulations.
Thank
That
you,
is
thank you.
so exciting. I think that support groups, peer support, um, or support, whatever kind of support group, I think are so, so important to get folks together that have similar or relatable lived experiences
Hmm.
is so validating. I can tell you just from my own personal experience of attending some of these kinds of meetings, it's made the world of a difference
Yeah,
to
it has.
know, right? And it just to know that you're not alone and you're in a room with folks that quote unquote get it. Um, yeah, so powerful,
Yeah,
so
I will say,
validating.
like, if anyone ever has that feeling that they're feeling alone, you are definitely not alone in this. There is an entire community of people that have your back.
I
That if
totally
yeah,
agree. I always like to remind people you're never as alone as you feel
yeah.
because I think feeling alone is a very valid feeling.
Hmm.
I mean, I often even feel it myself. I feel very alone sometimes, very lonely. Um, but I always remind myself that I'm not actually as alone as I feel. As valid as an experience it is that I'm having or a feeling that I'm having, it's never the reality is never the same as the feeling. Um, so yeah, I love that reminder. That's so important. One thing I wanted to leave us on as well is just looking to next year. Um, January, I don't know what you feel like, Zia, but I feel like January is December and January, two of the hardest months for me of the year, always.
Yep, for sure.
Um, and so even when you get through the holidays, I feel like January is like its own kind of experience in itself. That's so different from December. I feel like there's so much noise. And like you said earlier, December is like one of the biggest months of the season, right? We're just
Hmm.
so busy. There's so many events and opportunities available. And then January hits and it's like so different.
Yes.
Often quite quiet, actually. And or there's still things happening but not at the same pace, and
Hmm.
so that like change in pace and that like change in weather as well. I don't know, it's been clocked sometimes even in the media as like one of the most depressing months of the year. I'm curious, Dia, like what do you do in January to get through?
Well, I mean, like I can't really say because it changes every year. But like January and December are definitely yin and yangs to each other. Where
Yeah,
just like you said, like December is like it's very much like go 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 go.
yeah.
This is the holiday season, and then right after New Year's, it just kind of drops. So yeah, it's it's certainly different. It's certainly a different feeling. Me personally, I just have to get ready to know that. Even just from a financial aspect, it's not going to be the same as December.
Yeah,
It's going to be a much slower aspect, just in terms of like how busy you are. Things are going to slow down a lot. Just from a kitchen standpoint, you have to order a lot less, which is like it's very different from December, where
yeah.
like production, everything just kind of slows down. So yeah, I mean, like what I usually just say for myself now is just take it a day at a time, take it a step at a time. You are a human
Hmm.
being. Don't overwhelm yourself with like or try not to overwhelm yourself with like what's going on in the outside world. Like just take it one breath at a time, one step at a time.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. And I agree with you. You never know what's coming. But one thing that I've definitely taken to unlearning, I find that this industry, hospitality, restaurants, and such, we're very reactive.
Yes.
And as an industry, and even just the way we train folks in the workplace, I remember always being kind of trained that way to just like react to things. But one thing I've taken to unlearning is to try to be more proactive. Um, and so sometimes, when I'm looking to a couple weeks ahead, I mean, it's true. Some days it is one moment at a time, one breath at a time, one day at a time. Um, but one thing I like to just share is that if you are feeling like you're in a more stable place or a good place to look forward, I've found it incredibly powerful to plan ahead
Yes.
when I'm feeling good for when I'm not feeling well. So, what I mean by that is that not that I'm planning to not feel well, it's kind of a harm reduction approach, like thinking that there may be things coming. I'll just prepare and plan accordingly, knowing that it may or may not happen.
Hmm.
Because most Januaries have been quite rocky. Um, so sometimes I'll plan for things in January to keep me accountable, to keep me, you know, distracted or busy or focused on something else, like sometimes I'll plan certain projects for January, but like you said, like my own personal projects, not like the noise of the world, not like New Year's
Yes.
resolutions, not like that kind of stuff. That's not what I'm talking about. I mean more like just something for yourself. Um, Maybe something that you've wanted to do all year but didn't get to do, I'll kind of like save that kind of thing for January. Um, and being like taking that new approach for the first couple of years I did this, it was really uncomfortable and I was just like very overwhelmed by this.
Hmm.
But I've been doing it for a few years now, and there's different tools that exist out there. Some of them are like reflection tools, like looking back on the year kind of thing, and planning ahead for future years, and trying to strengthen that weak muscle has been immensely powerful, I've found. Trying to be more proactive versus reactive has really helped me with my mental health journey. Now that I know that, this time of year is always a bit rough.
Yeah, it
I
definitely
like,
is.
yeah, like I like having these things in place that I know help me. Um, Projects to keep me focused on kind of thing. Because you're right, January can be quite quiet compared to December. And sometimes that quiet can feel very overwhelming. Um, so, anyways, I just appreciate you sharing, or sorry,
Yeah, of course.
answering that
And like,
question.
I do also apologize because like I'm also kind of in my routine now. So like one thing I do want to mention is I do have just being sober myself now. Like I do have a community of meetings that I attend for myself, and so
Nice.
like I will have more time to attend more meetings if need be. But yeah, like sometimes I just kind of forget that because it's so ingrained in my routine now.
That's
So yeah,
amazing,
yeah, I
Dia. And
should I should mention that.
no, it's true. I mean, sometimes we forget though, right? Because we've been
Yeah,
at it for a few years.
yeah.
Like you said, 3 years. Congratulations. That's
Thank you.
very exciting. I yeah, I myself, I don't attend groups, but I do a lot of therapy. Um,
Mhm.
and I actually have more than one therapist that I see for different things, and I have found that that has completely changed my life. Um, Oftentimes, it's funny, we talk about therapy, but oftentimes we don't share what kinds of therapy we do. I think people think therapy is just like a blanket term. And I always like to be specific because I used to do different forms of therapy, but now I do one called internal family systems. It's called IFS therapy. And I've been doing this for about 3 years now. And it has been absolutely life altering. I used to do CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, and I found that that was a good foundation, but it didn't really help me heal a lot of trauma that I had, and IFS definitely has helped with that specifically. Um, and it's also like taught me how to have more compassion for myself, which, after similar to you, something you said earlier in the session was, you spend a long time hating yourself. That really resonates. I think
Yep.
I've spent most of my life hating myself,
Hmm.
and it really wasn't until the last decade that I learned how to make that shift. And now, in the last couple of years in particularly, I totally don't feel the same way about that anymore. I have so much self-love and so much
Hmm.
self-compassion. Um, and I really owe that to all of the work. Oh my gosh, I've just realized the time. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Zia, so much for joining.
Absolutely.
Megan, I will let you close us out, but you know how